If I can remember the other one, I will be. It was good. It was very good for you.
So I understand what you mean now. I don't
Well, you're all dramatic and correct on everything. And then one of the is three. Right. But then the other one is, I know it.
all right.
It's a good approach.
Not as bad as Sunday morning. Good evening. Good evening and welcome to worship. Good evening and welcome to worship. I'm glad you've heard God's call to come into this place this night for the service of Tenebrae, the service of darkness, where we'll hear the last 7 words of Christ from the cross. We thank Cynthia for again playing for us this night. The whole service is in your bulletin, but it'll also be directed on the screen so that as it gets progressively darker, you'll be able to see words to songs and you'll feel like you know what's going on. Do we have any announcements? Easter egg hunt tomorrow, rain or shine. 2 services Sunday, 7 a.m., sunrise service, bring a little breakfast, and 10:30 our regular worship. What else would we like to hear this evening before we get started? Okay, well, this traditionally is a service that we leave in silence, so I'm going to invite you to stand and greet your neighbor so you can get all that talking out of your system before you go. Let us join our hearts as we pray together. Holy God, on this holy night, we come into your presence to remember. To remember the cross, to remember your suffering on our account, and to sing the songs that remind us of who you are and that we are yours. And so, God, bless this holy time of worship in the name of Christ. Amen. Our first song is Were You There? And the words are on the screen.
The first words of Jesus come from Luke 23:33 through 34. When they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified Jesus, and there with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they cast lots to divide his clothing. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." The first saying of Jesus on the cross is traditionally called the word of forgiveness. It is interpreted as Jesus' prayer for forgiveness for those who were crucifying him, the Roman soldiers, for all others who were involved in his crucifixion, and for all of us as well.
The second word of Jesus is Luke 23:39 through 43. One of the criminals who was hanged there kept deriding him and saying, "Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed have been condemned justly, for we are getting what we deserve for our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." He replied, "Truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. This saying is traditionally called the word of salvation. Jesus was crucified between two thieves, one of whom supports Jesus' innocence and asks him to remember him when he comes into his kingdom. Jesus replies, "Truly I say to you," followed by the promise of inclusion in the heavenly life to come. This promise is for all who claim Jesus as Lord.
Third word, John 19:26 through 27. When Jesus saw his mother and his disciple whom he loved standing beside her, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." Then he said to his disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that hour the disciple took her into his own home. "Woman, behold your son, behold your mother." This statement is traditionally called the word of relationship. And in it, Jesus entrusts his mother, Mary, into the care of a faithful disciple. In this word, we are reminded of our responsibility to care for each other.
The fourth word, Mark 15:33 through 34. When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lem sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" My God, why have you forsaken me?" This saying is traditionally called the word of abandonment. Found in both Matthew and Mark, it is the only of Christ's sayings that appears in more than one of the Gospels. This saying is given in Aramaic with the translation following. The phrase is the opening line of Psalm 22. It was common for people at this time to reference a psalm by quoting its first line. If this was Jesus' intent, Psalm 22 is filled not only with expressions of trouble and woe, but also with the assurance of God's gracious presence, always.
The fifth word from John chapter 19, verse 28 reads, After this, when Jesus knew that all was now finished, he said, in order to fulfill the scripture, I am thirsty. I thirst. This statement is traditionally called the word of distress. In it, we're reminded of the humanity and suffering of Jesus and his teaching. I was hungry and you fed me, thirsty and you gave me a drink. As you have done it to one of the least of these, you have done it to me.
The sixth word, Luke 23, 44 through 46. It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon, while the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus, crying with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Having said this, he breathed his last. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. This saying, which is an announcement and not a request, is traditionally called the word of reunion and is theologically interpreted as the proclamation of Jesus joining God, the Father in heaven. This word is often used in our funeral services to remind us of our reunion with God.
The seventh word, John 19:29 and 30. A jar full of sour wine was standing there. So they put a sponge full of the wine on a branch of hyssop and held it to his mouth. When Jesus had received the wine, he said, "It is finished." Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. It is finished. This statement is traditionally called the word of triumph and is theologically interpreted as the announcement of the end of the earthly life of Jesus. No more needs to be done. The work of salvation is completed. It is finished.
It's Friday. Jesus is praying. Peter's sleeping. Judas is betraying. But Sunday's coming. It's Friday. Pilate's struggling. The council is conspiring. The crowd is vilifying. They don't even know that Sunday's coming. It's Friday. The disciples are running like sheep without a shepherd. Mary's crying. Peter is denying. But they don't know that Sundays are coming. It's Friday. The Romans beat my Jesus. They robe him in scarlet. They crown him with thorns. But they don't know that Sunday's coming. It's Friday. See Jesus walking to Calvary, his blood dripping, his body stumbling, and his spirit's burdened. But you see, it's only Friday. Sunday's coming. It's Friday. The world's winning. People are sinning, and evil's grinning. It's Friday. The soldiers nailed my Savior's hands to the cross. They nailed my Savior's feet to the cross. And then they raised him up next to criminals. It's Friday. But let me tell you something. Sunday's coming. It's Friday. The disciples are questioning what has happened to their king. And the Pharisees are celebrating that their scheming has been achieved. But they don't know it's only Friday. Sunday's coming. It's Friday. He's hanging on the cross, feeling forsaken by his Father, left alone and dying. Can nobody save him? Oh, it's Friday, but Sunday's coming. It's Friday. The earth trembles, the sky grows dark. My King yields his spirit. It's Friday. Hope is lost. Death has won. Sin has conquered. And Satan's just a laughing. It's Friday. Jesus is buried. A soldier stands guard, and a rock is rolled into place. But it's Friday. It is only Friday. Sunday is a coming.